Hello, hello. Today is a beautiful day. We are going to continue with the topic called trigonometry. But in today's lesson, our main focus will just trying to identify the signs of the three trigonometric ratios in the quadrants. That is what we are going to look at in today. So to begin, the first thing you should ask yourself is, what are quadrants? Just in case you have forgotten what quadrants are, let me remind you. Quadrants are a way to divide a coordinate plane or a graph into four regions or sketch. So let's write it down. We are going to say, a question that you may want to ask is, what are quadrants? What are quadrants? So that's a question you may want to ask yourself. What are quadrants? Question mark. So to answer this question is, quadrants are a way to divide, okay, a way to divide a graph into four regions, or you can say sections, into four sections. That is what I can explain about quadrants. The definition of quadrants. Quadrants are simply a way to divide the graph. Now you know how a graph look like. It has y and x axis. That is how a graph look like. So if we know what a graph is, then we need to be aware that the quadrants will divide that graph into four equal parts. So let's try to draw it down. We have this is our graph. Okay, this is our graph. We know that the graph has got x-axis, y-axis, and therefore now there is an important part we need to understand. A quadrant divides the graph into four equal parts, but this Cartesian plane or this graph has a rotation of 360 degrees. So we'll start with where the zero, where x-axis is, where x is, this is where 0 degrees is, and 360 degrees. Because when we move from 0, we'll go to 90 degrees there. From 90, we have 180 degrees there, and then we have 270 degrees to 360 degrees, making a whole revolution, meaning of 360 degrees. So once we understand what this graph is about, then we need to know, where do quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4 falls in. So in this range of angles, we have ranges of 0 degrees to 90 degrees. This is where you find quadrant 1. Then from 90 degrees to 180 degrees, this is where you find quadrant 2. Then from 180 degrees to 270 degrees, this is where you find quadrant 3. From 270 degrees to 360 degrees, this is where you find quadrant 4. Hence now, this is where the quadrants fall in, by dividing the whole of the Cartesian plane or the graph into four equal parts: quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. Now the angles, these angles and these ranges are very important in this lesson and the next lessons to come. So once you understand where the quadrants fall in, then we need to come to answer the questions. The question which simply says the signs of the three trigonometric ratios. Now, the trigonometric ratios, we can abbreviate to trigonometric ratios. Now, we know these ratios that we are talking of: the sine, cos, and the tan. These are the ratios we are talking about. Now, we need to answer the question, what are the signs for this? We need to know the signs. What are the signs? Is it positive or negative? The signs we're talking about. Now, these ratios fall in these quadrants. So where are these? Where they are quadrants, they are also the ratios. So let's draw a rough sketch again here, where we know that this is our 90 degrees now. This is our 0 degrees. This is our 180 degrees and 270 degrees. Then we have our 360 degrees there. So we know that this is our quadrant 1, this is quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. So in all the quadrants, these three signs, these three ratios, they repeat themselves. So in the first quadrant, we have sine, cos, and tan. Same applies in the second quadrant, we have sine, cos, and tan. In the third quadrant, we have sine, cos, and tan. In the fourth quadrant, we have sine, cos, and tan. Now, the main issue is, what are the signs? That's the main issue. What are the signs of these ratios? So just to remind yourself, this is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Now, what are the signs for these ratios? So you need to know that from the first quadrant, all the three ratios are positive, meaning that sine is positive, cos is positive, tan is positive as well. But in the second quadrant, sine is positive, and cos is negative, tan is negative. On the third quadrant, sine is negative, cos is negative, and tan is positive. Then on the fourth quadrant, sine is negative, cos is positive, and tan is negative. So these are the signs attached to these ratios. You need to memorize and know these signs, because in the next lesson you need to apply these signs and ratios. So now let's try to see how best can we memorize this. We can best memorize this to what we call the cast diagram. I'm sure you heard this before. Cast what? Diagram. The cast diagram. It is a very important diagram that you should memorize, because you can use the cast diagram to sketch trigonometric equation and etc. So the cast diagram is of course the same as these other diagrams I've drawn. It has a measurement of 90 degrees. We have 0 degrees there, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and 360 degrees. So this cast diagram, it is called the cast diagram because we can identify the positive signs and negative signs in each quadrant. For example, in the first quadrant, what is positive? Which ratio is positive? All the ratios are positive. So we write A in the first quadrant. Then in the second quadrant, which ratio is positive? It is the sign. So we write capital letter S there. In the third quadrant, which ratio is positive? It is the tan. So we write capital letter T. Then in the fourth quadrant, which ratio is positive? It's the cos. So we write C, we write C there to identify that C is positive. All quadrants are positive, all sign ratios are positive, sine is positive, and tan is positive. So this makes a cast diagram. Okay, this makes a cast diagram where we see in the first quadrant, all the ratios are positive, but in the second quadrant, sine is positive. In the third quadrant, tan is positive, and in the fourth quadrant, cos is positive. Hence the cast diagram. So some people would want to have it as a memory aid of saying all students take calculus. We can say all students take calculus. All students take calculus. So cast diagram can also be known as all students take calculus, meaning that in the first quadrant, all the ratios sine, cos, and tan are positive. In the second, only sine is positive. In the third quadrant, only tan is positive. And in the fourth quadrant, only cos is positive. So these now will help us to understand the next lesson, which we will be looking at the unit circle. So please, I advise you, if you have not watched the previous videos on trigonometry, to go and watch them, because this video, it is one way of advancing the knowledge that you have in trigonometry. For now, we end